Venture Magazine. We are the #1 business magazine in the cannabis space, covering both the marijuana and the CBD businesses. And we are hosting the RAD Expo, the Retail and Design Expo in Portland, in October this year. It is a business show aimed at the retail side of the cannabis and CBD industries. So make sure you guys, if you're interested in that, and all retailers get in free to that one. So if you're interested, theradexpo.com. I'd like to introduce our panelists for the day, who are going to help us find our way through this panel on consistency in CBD formulation. First is Christina Sasser. She is the CEO and Chief Product Formulator of Vitaleaf. She has 15 years in the industry and is a holistic chef with a focus on plant-based CBD medicines. Next up is Kayla Fioravanti. Did I get that right?
Good.
All right. The owner and chief formulator of Ology Essentials. She's been in the natural skincare industry for 20 years and has published 12 books on it, and will be available tomorrow at the book signing. So head on down there and make sure you get her to sign her copies of her books. Next to her is Janelle Kim. She is the founder and chief formulator of JBK Wellness. They're a contract manufacturing company and created the first luxury CBD skincare in the world, Cannabis Beauty. She is also director of doctor of traditional Oriental medicine. Next to her is Mr. George Ho, the CEO of, I wrote this wrong here, Micro Sativa Premium CBD, and Ingenuity Beverage, a dual CGMP certified manufacturer. And down at the end next to him is Calumet Leaf. He is the CEO of Praxogen Biomedia here in Seattle and a physician scientist of botanical medicine. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off giving some questions to our panelists so they can answer on this, but there will be time at the end for all of you to answer to ask questions if we don't get to what you want to ask. Also, you can probably pin them down and ask them questions directly after the panel anyway, as they won't be able to get away too quickly, as there are a limited number of doors. So to begin, this is a panel talking about, of course, the consistency of cannabinoid formulations. So I want to start with the big view here and just lob the big question right off the bat and say, why? Why is it important to have the consistency in our cannabinoid formulations? And I'll just start here.
Okay, I'm supposed to be able to talk without...
Hey, everybody. Well, obviously, consistency is important because people are depending on CBD to help them with relief for the issues that they're dealing with. So consistency and quality is hugely important, and there's a lot of people getting ripped off right now from poor quality products that don't have what they say they have on the label.
I'll say from the legal standpoint, according to the FTC and the FDA, you have to say what you say is in the packaging has to be what's in the packaging.
Yeah.
Got it. So kind of building upon what my peers over here, my colleagues over here said. So the healing nature of the formulas, consistency is key, and I'm sure we'll get into that more. Legal aspect, you just mentioned that. Of course, we're a contract manufacturing lab, and so we follow suit with everything that was said. Another point that has not yet been brought up is that ultimately we partner with clients who bring brands to the market, and so when you are in places such as Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom's, Whole Foods, CVS, Walgreens, which many of our clients kind of span those industries, the product has to be consistent as a brand. Otherwise, you'll get many, many phone calls to your customer service asking what in the world changed.
Absolutely concur with what they were saying. The way I see things is that I grew up working with my dad for free at a Chinese restaurant for 10 years, and he always said at a young age, fried rice, your dumplings better taste good every single time, right? I'm a contract manufacturer, plus we own our own brand now, Micro Sativa. But on the contract manufacturing side, I always joke around, I'm the Chinese chef in the back of P.F. Chang's. It's the biggest white man restaurant in the world for Chinese food. And everywhere you go, every city you go, the egg rolls are the same, the hot sour soup's the same, and consumers are looking for that. Because if you change the taste of the product, what's inside what's on the label needs to be inside of the product also. But the first thing the consumer is going to do is they're going to taste the product, and if the taste is off, then placebo-wise, we're going to get complaints. They're going to get a whole bunch of like cascading effects. So you need to do your utmost to try to make your product consistent across the board.
Hello. I would say that the consistency aspect is an important factor because so many people are depending on CBD and cannabis products in order to progress with a particular health goal that they have. And there's so many other variables involved in human health and changes in people's emotional status and relationship and work and stresses in life that the more inconsistencies there are, the more difficult it is for a person to know, are they not getting better or is the product not doing well? And I really wouldn't want anybody to feel like their condition was getting worse simply because they bought some bad product or a poorly labeled product. And of course, overall, it's a detriment to the industry because if a person doesn't get a good effect that could have been helped, then they're not going to go try another product. They'll just think the problem is CBD.
Now, when it comes to these ingredients, we're dealing with a lot of botanical ingredients, which, as we all know, have a wide natural variation. And so as formulators, how do you ensure that the natural products that you're getting and using have a consistency in your own formulations? We'll start, Kayla, do you want to start this one?
Sure. Well, for the CBD section of it, basically we're going to make sure that it comes with all the testing for every single batch to make sure that we're able to make sure that they're going to get exactly what they're expecting. Some of the other things, I specialize in natural and organic formulations, so a lotion may change in consistency because of the consistency of one of the butters that came in. So we just watch very closely what comes in. If there's a big change, then we may make a small alteration in the formula to adjust for it, a little less water, something like that sort of thing. So there's, and we also microtest everything coming in to make sure that all these natural ingredients coming in didn't come in contaminated.
Do any of the rest of you have other ways that you maintain consistency in the products coming in for your formulations?
I can speak to that, yeah. Having a good quality control SOP system in place is critically important for all of the ingredients that come in, whether that be cannabinoids or food ingredients or other items. Even your packaging is important. Specifically with cannabinoids, though, it is very tricky. For 3 years now, we've been doing cannabinoid products, and that is by far the most tricky aspect because the cannabinoids are constantly changing. You get different terpene profiles, you have different strains, especially if you're dealing with full spectrum cannabinoid oils, and that's what we put into our product line. It's a lot easier for people to formulate with an isolate because it's just 99% pure CBD. That's why a lot of people use it. Distillates, similarly, it's a little bit easier because you don't have the terpenes. But with the full spectrum cannabinoids, they're constantly shifting and changing. So the thing that we have done is really started to work with the farmers that we source with. We take it all the way back to the source and trying to create consistency from seed to final plant to the concentrates and the extracts that then go into the final product. So consistency with the genetic variation of the plant and the methodologies in the extraction process. And then really studying your COAs, your lab test results on the cannabinoid concentrates, and comparing them to what you've done in previous batches. And blending. We blend like crazy to get consistency in products. We have to, otherwise it would be all over the map.
What do you mean by that, by blending to get the consistency?
We will blend cannabinoid concentrates in order to get profiles that are consistent with the minor terpenes, the minor cannabinoids, and always formulating so that we have consistency with the active cannabinoids that are ending up in the final product.
Janelle, you looked like you were to jump in there. Was I misreading?
Yes, I am sitting here thinking, how much time do we have again? That's right, okay, that's right, I have to stick on. Because clearly I made it very clear that the consistency when it comes to testing of, standardized, having certain standardized pieces in place are so important. Micro-testing, stability testing, C of A's, everything, even from an herbology standpoint, that's how we've created formulas for thousands of years. We may not have had our testing labs per se, but we're able to look at those herbs. We identify anyways, right, using certain testing procedures, but as an herbologist, we do this anyways. When an herb comes into the lab, just by being an herbologist, what that means, a true herbologist, means you can look at that herb and you know the difference because you know the potency of that herb, you know the smell of it, the taste of it, the feel of it, right? So it goes way back. But there is an aspect to all of this that it has to be, I feel like it has to be acknowledged as we continue this conversation, and you just brought that up, that at the core of medicine, and at the core of herbal medicine in particular, that variation is also important. That's where we get into the entourage effect, we get into synergism. So how do we find that balance? I say I'm a walking example of that, right? I am literally East and West. My father's Korean, my mother's American, and I really, really love looking at how everything comes together to create that balance. So to sum this all up, what I mean is I like to use an example of understanding the concept of adaptogenic herbs, something that in the West came about not so long ago, but builds on the principle of Eastern and herbal medicine as it has for thousands of years. Let's take adaptogenic medicine. The understanding is that this herb literally survives, one way of explaining it, in this universe. It's grown, how it survives through it, and when you take it, right, is exactly what it's able to do for your body. And that's such a beautiful picture of truly how medicine works at the most fundamental level, right? And so how it did that might be different, just like each one of us is different. Literally every single one of your herbs is alive, including CBD, hemp, cannabis. And so those variations make oftentimes those healing properties. And so how do we balance that? That is certainly a huge conversation we can be having, of having the pure and the consistent, when it comes to C of A's, testing, like I just said, but also making sure that we always understand that a lot of those healing properties cannot always be standardized.
Sure, I was just going to draw an analogy between cannabis as a botanical, even a medicinal botanical, and wine and beer, actually. And you mentioned about blending, and of course, table wine, like red table wine. Typically a vintner will blend the grapes because from year to year the crops are different. The challenge, which is I think kind of what George was alluding to, is culture. Because in certain cultures, people want to see the same strip mall every, 100 miles along the interstate, and other places they want Tuscany. And so a lot of it's going to have to do with consumer demand. Nobody's really going to know what's best for them. That's part of in a sense, the herbal tradition and adaptogens, that if we try to control for the material part, we may be missing something else. As well as this industry grows into the billions and billions, it attracts people with billion-dollar large-scale focus, and a Budweiser beer and a microbrew beer are not going to be the same. And so for the consumer, for the small business people, it will be helpful to recognize that factor, because there's no way that somebody who's pushing 100 kilograms, per warehouse of oil out each day is really looking at those plants and talking to the farmers at that level. They might be talking to them saying, well, you could increase your yield, but they're not going to say, well, the leaves were a little bit smaller and there was this, and did you, and so it's a beautiful space. Because I like the unknown. I like when humans are confronted with the unknown, because it's a mirror to us, to ourselves. We're not so identical as the products that we'd like to control. And so I think it gives us a great insight into ourselves, and cannabis is all about that.
How many in here at this panel are looking for a new product development or something, or trying to stabilize their product in the audience? So I think one of the things is that same thing with Amazon and Microsoft is like garbage in, garbage out, right? Whereby we like to eat Wagyu beef, so you can't make ground beef into Wagyu beef, okay? It's hard. Now you can a little bit with the isolate, but with people, as she said, full spectrum and then broad spectrum, these are things that it's harder to control. And right now, we're still in the embryonical beginnings with hemp seed, and it comes down to genetics. So I'm not an agronomist. I don't have a PhD in genetics. I think one of the other things that really helped me was these events are very important, but also go to some of the farming events. I think that really changed my mind. When I went to Kentucky farming events, I went to the Tennessee farming events, and meeting the farmers face to face and talking to them, then you're able to figure out who's really doing a really good job and who people respect in that room, all right? And then you also figure out who are really the good extractors that farmers like, so you get to look at another side totally, and those type of locations, people are not trying to really sell you their product. You can just feel free to talk to them, and then, as she said earlier on, it all starts with the farm. It starts with the farm. We're not early enough. I've talked to some agronomists that are talking about long-term, maybe tissue culture and trying to do more control environments growing inside, because heat and all the exogenous factors will determine what the final outcome is. So testing is all important, but you need to also figure out, as he said, what type of product you're trying to focus on. If you're trying to do a Toyota or a Ford product, and it's still going to work because so many people are getting great results from using CBD. That is one sector, and you can find a lot of people doing that type of extraction. Or if you're trying to do a Bugatti, then you really got to dig in heavily into sourcing and then the farming aspect. But either way, though, you got to pick where your target is and just go after it. Don't be like me, okay? I'm from Knoxville. I didn't have enough chutzpah like she did in the beginning. 5 years, people kept asking about CBD, and I was just very scared. My son goes to a little Baptist little elementary school, and as he said, my last name is Ho. So the last thing I wanted him at a young age is like his friends going, "Oh, you're a Ho, and your dad sells weed too." That's just not a good combination. So it was only after the farming bill passed, no, seriously, okay, farming bill passed, that I started, really delving into it and talking to the farmers and feeling their passion and seeing that, from the ground up, something's about to change, and I don't want to miss that.
Go ahead, sir.
One little thing to add, and since George mentioned isolate, for those of you who are interested in thinking in that space, it is a cultural issue, and isolate represents the extreme of that culture, because that's absolutely controlled, and it's absolutely going to be the same from batch to batch to the extent of our ability to measure it. However, you also lose a lot of the medicinal effect, not just because of what people might call faith or, you think that it's not as good because it's not the whole plant. There are scientific studies that show what they call an inverted U-shaped curve, where the optimal dose is, say, 300 milligrams, but at 100 milligrams there's no effect, and at 900 milligrams there's no effect. That makes it very difficult for people and their physicians and anyone else to try and work with it, because it's very counterintuitive, and that magic spot may vary from person to person. But culturally speaking, for people that are into purity and control, isolate will be the thing. That's why pharmaceutical companies are big and botanical companies are small, because it has that cultural appeal. Viagra and Percocets and all that are going to be the same from day to day to day to day, batch to batch. And that somehow we think is better than something that varies. So but like I said, that's just cultural. Because in another culture, the 1984 Bordeaux and the 1990 Bordeaux, nobody wants them to be the same. Mm-hmm. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
We also, I think a good example of, certainly in this situation, it's not something we're lucky, because an isolate of CBD is not necessarily harmful to one, right? You might lose some of those effects. But just to give an example of where it can be harmful or the medical, we have an herb, called ahuang. It's ephedra. Thank you. I have to speak.
Yeah, I think you got to keep the mic in the mic.
I can also just talk without it. I have loud enough voice. Thank you very much. I will now have 2 microphones. You could also hang one over my head, and I could just be surrounded by microphones. But this is a really important case of understanding the whole herb versus a standardized extract, let's say, right? So, herba ephedra, mahuang, is an incredible herb that we use in our medicine to, for example, treat asthma in children, right? Okay, so this was taken away from us because a company decided to standardize this, take out certain constituents of this whole herb, whole plant, and they made it into metabolife. I think it was I can't believe I'm losing this, but it was basically for weight loss, right? And so clearly it was pulled off the market after a couple of years because it was very dangerous. And so they took the whole herb away. And that's, I think, is a very good example of the difference between sometimes when we go a little too extreme on one end, as you're so beautifully saying culturally, when you have to understand the whole picture to see. In this case, we're lucky because I don't think too much harm can ever come from isolate. That's the truth. But sometimes if you don't understand the principle of that herbal medicine or medicine in general, that's how far it can go, where you can actually start to harm people if you don't understand properly.
Now, some of you use both isolate and the full spectrum in your formulations. How do you maintain a consistency in the isolate, or is that just always the same, or do you have to follow up your sources? Kayla?
Well, isolate, tends to always be the same.
Should be.
Funny. So there's where you don't have a consistency issue. It's when you're in full spectrum and the broad spectrum where you have to look much closer at all your COBs.
And the market is splitting, whereby you'll have people, mass consumers are using isolate and broad spectrum 0.0% THC, and then there's another segment that wants the full spectrum. It really, you have to try to figure out what your story is and what you're going after and to pick the right decision. And then eventually, McConnell will probably give us more clarity of is isolate even going to be allowed? Some people are saying long-term isolate won't be allowed because GW is going to want that. And then, so those are things you have to try to figure out.
The best advice I would give to other entrepreneurs that are wanting to understand how to formulate a product with full spectrum oil or even broad spectrum oil, or potentially even a blend of full spectrum with an isolate or a distillate, which is something that my company does, especially for edible products, because there's a flavor masking element that goes into this. If I put all full spectrum oil into my chocolate bars at 100 milligrams per bar, it would taste awful. I've tried. I've tried with lots of different oils. It tastes awful. So I have to do a blend with distillates with full spectrum oil. Now, the shorthand answer when people say, is this full spectrum? I say yes. But if, we're very transparent. We publish all of our lab results, and it is what it says it is as far as the cannabinoid content that goes into that bar. But it is full spectrum. We use a blend. Now, the biggest piece of advice I would give, and this is kind of a secret, so for those of you that are in this room, you're getting some really good advice here.
Don't worry, no one's listening.
The best thing you can do is to learn how to use dynamic spreadsheet formulations, where you plug in your COA formulas into a spreadsheet where you have your recipe and you know your minor cannabinoids that you want highlighted in your formulas. So for example, we do not want CBN in our formulas because our tagline is a dose of vitality. We want to create products that evoke, feeling of aliveness and radiance. And we don't really want people to eat our chocolate and fall asleep. So we don't want any CBN. So first thing we do is we screen all cannabinoids in full spectrum so that they don't have CBN or that they have very low levels of CBN. Now what we do like to see is CBG. So we particularly select for full spectrum that are high in CBG. Or sometimes you can even spike a formula with a CBG isolate. But that spreadsheet, learn how to, if you don't know how to do a spreadsheet, then find a spreadsheet genius who can help you turn your recipe into a dynamic formula that you can plug in COAs and it can spit back out a production protocol for you with different oils.
I just want to back that up as something that has worked really well in the aromatherapy world. So it's not disrespected to do this kind of blending, so you're getting exactly what you want. So in aromatherapy, there's a lavender that when you're looking for it, it says 4042. It tells you exactly what the levels of the linalool and the linoleic acid are, because that's what matters for what you're formulating for. So it's been a practice for a very long time, and aromatherapists around the world, everyone's like, this is great, this is perfect, because I know exactly what I'm getting it for. So I just wanted to back that up.
Now, we talked about standardization and consistency, but Janelle, you were saying earlier that there's a difference between those two.
Well, what I said was, what did I say back there? I said, well, how do you define consistency? So what does that mean to you, right? So we could get into this whole long conversation and each have totally separate conversations. And what I meant by that is kind of what I covered before. A consistency, as I said, in our lab, at our lab, as we contract manufacture for clients, as I said, who are in certain industries with huge big box chains that you have to have consistent formulations, or our clients will certainly be coming back to us. And it is very picky. If we have a salve that has a little bit of, a bubble in it, particularly in our European clients. The European is a wonderful market to be a part of. They have a very deep, maybe even a longer history of knowing, more of naturopathic, so on and so forth, and integrating it. But boy, they have one little bubble in their salve. Our lab, our doors are knocked down. We're like, that's actually very normal. In America here, it's very interesting to see these trends. But so when I say consistency, I think it's very important to have consistency of exactly what you're looking for in your product, as George explained before. And as I explained before with the standardized extracts, now we get into much more of a conversation of whole plant versus standardized, which I kind of already covered all those things. So that's it in summary.
Very good.
So consistency is kind of maybe a holy grail kind of a thing, in the sense of consistency of what? Consistency of effect. You're probably never going to achieve that. So standardization is kind of, I'm trying to think of a good word. It's kind of a small-minded way of trying to ensure consistency of effect, such that if they're not consistency of effect, it's not your fault. You blame the patient. No, seriously, doctors blame patients all the time. I give 10 milligrams of this to people all the time, and their back pain goes away. What's wrong with you? Okay? Again, that's one of those cultural things, as opposed to saying, you're a doctor, you should know how to make my pain go away. If it has to be 15 milligrams, that's what it should take. So the standardization, for me, part of the difference between what I hear people saying and what I've seen other times when it comes to standardization, there's some people that are hunting the numbers and they don't have a feel for the product. And so then you can just say, I think it should have 12.5 milligrams of CBD, and the ratio between CBD and THC should be 1.25 to 3. Why?
Right.
But once you have those numbers, you can chase it down and you can make it perfect every time, but why? But if you really know your product, and especially if you've had a chance to interact with the product and people to get that feedback, then what I'm hearing from them is that they know what they're looking for, and they know that, yes, this has always worked well when the profile looked like this, and so we need an extra 10 milligrams per gram of CBD isolate in order to fill out this part of the fingerprint. So that's like an experienced person, as opposed to just somebody who's doing cookbook recipe stuff. So that comes with experience, but for people to hopefully be able to see the difference. Like there's a lot of Me Too stuff. So a person might decide, we analyzed their formula in HPLC mass spec, and this is what it is. So we're going to match it, standardize it, and mass produce it, and sell it to Walmart. And there's no guarantee that it'll be the same.
George, did you have something?
I think also, if this is your first product you're trying to get launched, you're at the event, try to network as many people as possible, especially with other people who have already got their product out. So you can talk to people besides the contract manufacturers to try to get the better expectation of what the norm is. Does that make sense? So you'll have a better expectation at the end when the product comes out. And I just can't emphasize enough that last 5 years, he's with Charlotte's Web. They're the OG in the marketplace. She's been doing it 3 years. As I said, I just started the contract manufacturing side with CBD pretty much this year, all right? And I see a window, is what I'm trying to tell you. That McConnell will eventually get this thing cleared because all the big box guys want in on ingestibles. You saw Kroger's come in with topicals, you saw CVS with topicals, but I'm telling you, Costco wants this thing, Bezo wants this thing, and Amazon, and they have this mentality, Bezo does at least, is that your margin is his opportunity. So if you're going to get started, in my opinion, is that try to do as much work as possible right now. Talk to some other cohorts, try to get a little mastermind of other people who already have products in the marketplace to get the right expectation and start marketing your product. And then once you start marketing your product, as he said, you'll start getting feedback, and then you can start iterating if you need to escalate and go to another stage if you want to. But this window is closing. You got to do whatever you got to do to be part of the ecosystem and then get your tribe going before the mass market guys come online.
Now, we're running out of time here, and so we want to leave an opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. But I have one more question for the panel, and that is that these are natural products for the most part, and so ensuring consistency doesn't necessarily end at the lab. Is that correct? How do you ensure that it's going to remain consistent once it goes into the shelf? And what are some of the problems you've encountered with that? Kaylin?
So the packaging makes a world of difference for these because they're natural, and I found that CBD can oxidize with air and light. And so if you've made this great product line and put it out on the shelves and you put it in packaging that doesn't protect it from UV light, your product turns pink, or some other natural ingredient in your product also reacts with the light, and you have a destroyed product line. So being very thoughtful and careful about the packaging that your product goes into for the long-term health of it.
And ultimately, when you go to a contract manufacturer to, most often, or at least it should be there, some idea of this, when you go to manufacture a product, we will do stability testing to ensure that your product has at least X number of years as a shelf life, which is very important. I mean, we've been in the natural product marketplace even before the CBD industry at JBK Wellness Labs, so natural products can change over time, and to a certain extent too, I think it's really a wonderful thing that's happening right now because there's so much education being had. Our world is definitely changing, and people understand now that to some extent being a natural product, like you see Goop. I'm so excited about this. When we first started creating products in the spa marketplace for Four Seasons, these luxury places, and when the natural market just started, let's say 16 years ago, we would have to come and explain to people, well, you have a serum, it's all natural, which is a beautiful thing that we're all looking for, so sometimes you have to shake it. It's not a big deal, just pick it up and shake it, and everything's going to be fine. When you educate that, they understand that, and then they use it, and everything's beautiful, and they get it. And now you see, for example, Goop, who I use that example a lot because she's so very well known with Gwyneth Paltrow, and she truly puts, a lot of mind into what she's doing and the message she's getting across. All of her labels say that. She talks about it all the time. So it's a wonderful thing because now people are much more aware of that. So we're certainly moving into a different place where people are more aware of these types of things. But when it comes down to making sure that your product does not completely, degrade 3 months later, that's something that whoever you go to manufacture your product should know. They should be doing stability testing from the get-go before you even take your product to market to make sure that does not happen.
And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the audience here. Does anybody have any questions for our panel? Christina's got a microphone. She's happy to come to you. Down here in the front.
Thank you all panelists. The contributions and unique insights were fantastic. I'm just interested, given your backgrounds, what do you feel the concepts of terroir and organoleptics might pertain to cannabis as an agricultural and maybe ingestible product? These standards for tracking and maintaining consistency are pretty standard in similar industries, wine and beer or other agricultural commodities. What role will they have in cannabis, cannabinoid, CBD, whichever? Thank you.
What role will terroir play, Kermit?
I mean, I can just make a generic comment that, again, and it's cultural. In this culture, the purity thing makes me want to throw things away. And I'm really hoping that advancements in science and also in information process, which enable people to run big data, will eliminate that need, because we'll start to find information in small niches where we had thrown it away, like all those other 138 or however many cannabinoids that everyone's ignoring because maybe there's just, a few micrograms of it. There are a lot of drugs that are very active at the microgram level. So personal perspective is to hope to track everything and then to look at the pattern and see what's there. So there's so many systems in the body that we don't, science, I should say, doesn't fully understand what the impact is. And we're working with the central nervous system, and organoleptics it's just, it goes straight into the brain. The nose is part of the brain, basically. So, and as a small little aside, I read an article somewhere that correlated the output of terpenes by the rainforest with rainfall, and saying that it's a causality, that the trees put out terpenes and it acts as cloud seeding in order to make it rain, and that's how they're able to control the rainfall. So those are things that we don't even think about, and how many terpenes are going into the air from all the grows around here. There are a lot of little things that we're tweaking that I would like for us to pay attention to rather than eliminating and standardizing out as though we already know the final answer.
I think for sure, I'm talking extractors, they're doing more genetics, trying to get more CBG, and then we're going to get other type of full spectrum stuff with other minor cannabinoids. But then they're going to do more research on cannabinoids. They're going to start throwing more money on terpenes and entourage effect. So this is going to be escalating more of people trying to up it and figuring out what's next, what's the next iteration to get into.
The next big cannabinoid is the next market. Did we answer your question? Yeah. Excellent. Any other questions from the audience on consistency for our panel? Over here.
Thank you for the panelists. You probably come across that there's a way that synthesize CBD, and do you think there's a room for that? Like when you make the analogy about the pharmaceutical company versus botanic, like is that going to be the future, like for synthesize the CBD from like E. coli, that's traditional what the drug company is doing, and versus the growing out of hemp?
Kayla?
I hope not, because I've watched this in the aromatherapy world and studied the history of it all, and how people wanting to make it in the lab, make lavender in the lab so that the smell will be consistent and it'll be less expensive, and everything will be, the product will seem more consistent. We've lost all the aromatherapy value of the plant itself. We've lost everything it does. It's actually the best thing in the world for a burn. They can't recreate it in the lab. There's nothing, they've tried to figure out why does that work better for a burn than anything else in the world. And so I think if you start making the CBD in the lab, you're going to lose all these things that we don't understand that come naturally from the product, from the plant material itself.
Yeah, there are a couple of examples. One is that there are people that have engineered yeast to produce cannabinoids, and so they only produce a single cannabinoid instead of the fuller spectrum. Again, in this culture of purity, ironically, maybe because of the need for purity, there's a lot of dishonesty. And maybe purity begets that, I don't know. But there's a misnomer, which the pure is really pure. And so you might have something that's 99% pure CBD, but what are the other components? And typically below level of detection or below regulatory requirement, it just passes through. And there could be other compounds that are being created. When you're creating a conjoiner, meaning similar molecular structure, a slight variation that may not show up in your analysis could have a huge impact on a person's brain. And for people that remember the whole problem with the drug thalidomide, the only issue is that one molecule, there were two molecules They're both thalidomide. They're identical, except they were mirror images of one another. And at the time, the level of science at the time didn't have the ability to synthesize the right-hand version, the left-hand version, and that's what caused the birth defects. It's actually not a quote-unquote bad drug. It was just limited or primitive chemistry. But we're on the vanguard of something called the endocannabinoid system, and as much as people want to exploit it via the market, there are lots of unknowns there. I wouldn't want to be the person whose company makes thalidomide.
I mean, thinking it's always going to be a split. I mean, she was